So I think it's useful to go back to the primary foundations of Sat Yoga, because I think we need a constant reminder of what is Sat Yoga? What are we doing here? What is the nature of this enterprise? And what is the final frontier that the enterprise is now approaching? So maybe I should write it on the board. Thank you. So the primary definition of Sat Yoga is the complete renunciation of the finite ego through the love of our infinite self. Now, this is the meaning of Sat Yoga in particular, but it's also the same definition for every traditional classical school of yoga, whether it's Buddhist yoga or Advaita Vedanta yoga or Shaivite yoga or Taoist yoga. This is the original and unchanging definition of yoga through time. Even those modern and postmodern forms of hatha yoga still retain that ultimate goal, even though they begin at the level of the body rather than that of consciousness itself. But ultimately, it's consciousness that we are, and that is both the means and the end of transformation and realization. There is nothing outside of consciousness. Even the body is an appearance in consciousness. There is no world outside consciousness. All is consciousness, and all is a single infinite consciousness. And that is our self. That is the self of every apparent individual being. And it is this shift of the locus of consciousness from the individual bodily identification with the mental operating system based on the conditionings of the childhood of that bodily being and its traumas and the vicissitudes of life that have created defenses and fabrications of meaning and diversions from the suffering and the incoherence of the ego's own internal economy and its volatility and lack of internal balance and stability and one-pointed willpower. All of the suffering of the individual consciousness can only be released through the love of the infinite self, in which that consciousness is not simply tinkered with therapeutically or through some self-help modality, but is completely renounced. And because renunciation does not take time, It simply takes a decisive determination. That realization of God can be instantaneous. It doesn't have to be a long, drawn-out affair of up and down and success punctuated by failure and disappointment and bad meditations and various eruptions of a lack of faith or a lack of understanding or a lack of interest in knowing the truth and the real of who we are that the ego is prone to, because the ego has its own homeostatic determination to continue to run the show of that individual vehicle. And it's only through the soul's conscious, voluntary, and one way, without going back on its decision, without even looking back, making the cut from that ego mind into the state of egoless presence. And until that happens, one really cannot consider oneself a Sat yogi. Because it's only that constant practice until every trace of the ego and its defensive attempt to draw one back into the lower chakras and assemblage points. It's only when the practice has become continuous and every trace of the finite ego has been incinerated through tapasya, the continued devotional action of surrender and letting go of the finite thinking apparatus until one attunes and is saturated by and gradually or immediately filled with that blissful presence that completely shatters and eliminates the ego complex and all of its illusions at a single stroke. That will be the final rite of passage into freedom. And this must be continuously remembered and returned to until there is no leaving of that state and it becomes the spontaneous and effortless functioning of the infinite self in its essential nature, without any internal sense of separate subjectivity from that. We have studied for a long time all of the resistances, particularly of the ego complex as it has been, let's say, manufactured by postmodern social conditions of capitalism and materialism, atheism, scientism, etc., that we have all learned by heart by now, no doubt. But all of those resistances are futile and completely without power to hold you back if you are willing to renounce that ego entirely, realizing that it is in your interest, if you wish to be free of suffering in the form of anxiety and depression and karmic glitches and all the other ways that the ego manifests. And if you wish to live a life that is divine and filled with grace, then this is the way. And as the Zen masters say, it's a gateless gate, because you are that now. It's obscured by the finite ego persona with its mental tendencies and sanskaric predispositions and attitudes, but none of that can hold you back when you are ready to renounce it completely at one stroke. And knowing that this is the only intelligent thing to do. It's the only way to live in freedom. It's the only way to overcome fear, whether it's the fear of life or the fear of death, or the fear of final judgment, or the fear of having to come back and do it all over again in another life. Whatever is the kind of fears that are harbored, whether in the conscious or the subconscious, because the ego itself is a paranoid program, there is no such thing as an ego free of fear. Even if there are defenses that compensate with bravado and megalomania and psychopathic sense of power to do whatever the ego desires, it cannot free itself from karma, and it cannot free itself from the abyss of its own lack of being. And sooner or later it will collapse. So to be free of that unstable and toxic structure that has been a prison for consciousness for far too long. Only the complete renunciation of that mental, emotional complex will bring about the liberation of the soul into Godhood, into the divinization that every religion encourages us to recognize and to realize.